Streaming channels have become an essential part of the local news content arsenal, but they're exacerbating the pressure on newsrooms to find audiences and revenues there as more viewers are shifting to those platforms. Many groups have now had some kind of representation on streaming platforms for years, and they've learned just how much there is to learn. These platforms aren't static, and in order to be competitive, it's not nearly enough just to plant the flag and walk away. You need to collect data, iterate, and pivot constantly. Our next panel is a group of experts in doing exactly that. Mike Braun is SVP of Digital Media at Gray Television. Greg Morrow is GM of View Nexa at Bit Central. Sahan Safernia is SVP of Streaming at CBS News and Stations. And Rick Young is SVP and Head of Global Products at LTN. Finally, Jeff Zelmer is the SVP of Digital Operations at Fox Television Stations. Welcome to you all. I want to get a baseline among the broadcasters as to where your news is simply currently iterating on AVOD and FAST channels, and how long it's been since you've planted the flag there. So Sahand, if you'd start, please.
Yeah, so CBS News and Stations have been pioneers amongst broadcasters in news. CBS News started streaming in 2014. CBS Stations started in 2018 with New York, followed by LA and all the other markets. Right now, we're distributed on 11 different platforms, up from 4 just 2 years ago. I'm happy to say right now, competitively, we are number 1 amongst local broadcasters with a 30% advantage in our markets.
Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, we dabbled for a while, but 2020 was when we really planted our flag with, at the time, what was coronavirus now. We felt there was a lack of information for those who were out there in the streaming space, and we wanted to make sure that in this moment of crisis, people could get the information they needed. And what we found was there was a lot of audience at that time, and then that pivoted into Black Lives Matters and then hurricane coverage, and it was, okay, how do we meet the needs for everybody? And that's what became Live Now from Fox. And so in 2020, that's really when we really got into this. And then based on the audience that we saw there, and the streaming habits, we said, you know what, this has to be more than just Live Now. And so we then this past year came in with our local news stations, our local news streams, just like Sahan mentioned, putting them across nearly every platform that we can, and then launching our own Fox Local app for our streams and news.
And let's not forget there's Fox Soul, which I think predated all of that too, right?
Fox Soul actually came out about the same time as Live Now.
Okay. And Mike, how about you?
So we started in about 2020, relatively the same time frame. Started right before COVID. It was actually a blessing in disguise when that took place, because we created what we call digital news desks in all of our markets. So we have 100 plus markets, and at that time we literally put in the infrastructure and the technology to allow our newsrooms to stream 24/7 any local event outside of the linear feed. That helped us then build into what we know today is Local News Live, which aggregates all of our streams and then also produces their own content.
Okay, so there's the baseline. Now, Sahand, you have a lot of very granular minute-by-minute data at CBS. Why don't you take us through some of the more significant general trends that you've seen, particularly on mornings or weekday mornings, and any other kind of salient data that jumps to the top?
Yeah, that's right. So we look at the minute-by-minute concurrence when we're evaluating the success of the streams. And it varies slightly amongst national and local. I'll focus more on local. We see that the local audience comes in about 1 to 1.5 hours earlier than the national audience. And because of that, we invested heavily in mornings. Now we have nearly 100 hours of live newscasts that are streaming exclusive in the mornings, and we've seen that drive new audiences. And so as we're starting to look at other day parts, looking at this minute-by-minute concurrent data, we're getting a lot smarter about what content we invest in and what content we want to invest in.
Is there anything that just totally surprised you, seemed to be counterintuitive when you look at that data?
So one of the things we were surprised about was, everybody here on this panel will say breaking news is what matters and live events is what matters. And as we looked at the minute-by-minute concurrence, we found that live events really start to pick up an audience after the first hour. So when we invested in live events that ran an hour to 2 hours, the ROI wasn't nearly as strong as live events that were much longer.
Interesting. So, Jeff, Fox's stations now have their own fast channels, as you mentioned, in addition to the Live Now channel. What, if anything, do you notice about the differences between the two audiences, whether it's demographic or the behavioral patterns on the respective services?
Yeah, live now, 24/7 live streaming news, right? And it's almost a little bit more of a casual viewer in a way that people are tuning in constantly throughout the day, but they are very much news junkies. They talk to us constantly about how they're in it because they've left other news, traditional news sources, and they want something that is not no opinion. They want something that's constant all the time. And then, as Sahan mentioned, when a live breaking event happens, we have people that just come in for that. They've learned that Live Now is always on, so if they hear about a live event, they come right to us immediately. On the local side, it's much more habitual. It's a lot more routine, and especially mornings as well. Mornings, there's a personal connection when people, even on the linear side, there's a personal connection. It's they're inviting a group of talent into their morning routine, and that connects with them. And so we see the same thing on the streaming side, almost sometimes to an even higher extent. That there were these people that once had a routine maybe on the linear, and now they can have it on the streaming side as well. So in the morning, we have people that come in starting at 5 a.m., 6 a.m., and really there's a great growth all the way through the morning that we weren't really expecting in that space. I mean, Tampa is a really good example. We have Good Day Tampa, one of the top morning newscasts that we have. And during the Women's World Cup, we had some conflict on the linear side where our programming of soccer overlapped with Good Day Tampa. And what we saw was that when we put the stream for Good Day Tampa on Fox Local and on our FAST channels, people went there at a really strong rate, which is showing that people really connect with that morning habit and that personal piece of how they have of their routine.
Do you notice any particularly strong time periods for engagement?
That would be, I mean, the mornings
morning.
are really on Fox Local. With Live Now, it's follows a similar trend with a lot of viewing at that time, but really that's based on the breaking news, the live events of the day, and what we're covering. And
engagement lengths, are they significantly different between the two?
If there's a live breaking event, it can be incredibly long, hours long on Live Now. On the Fox Local streams, we're seeing hour typically in the morning. People come in, they sort of have it's that habit. They come in, they know what they want to watch, and they're making it part of their morning.
So habits are starting to form on streaming now for news consumption.
Absolutely, and we're trying to figure that out.
So Mike, the big streaming story for Gray has been the expansion of Local News Live, which is based out of the Washington, D.C. Bureau, which the enterprise kind of grew, I guess, about a year or so ago with the relocation from Nebraska to Washington. You staffed up there. And then I understand fairly recently you expanded pretty significantly the distribution for that as well, right?
We are, that's right. So started a couple of years back, about 2020, when we started a little office, little studio in Omaha, Nebraska, just to test this out. Really was just trial by error, right, and see if there was any place for this. It really started because we wanted to have the ability to never go dark on our local streams. We thought that was really important. We still want to have the ability to replay our newscasts, but we didn't want that to be the focal point of our streaming. We really wanted this ability to have something live around the clock 24/7. And being as many markets, we started to realize we can aggregate a lot of this content and then redistribute it. And what we found pretty quickly is the engagement was through the roof. Was things that we never saw before. So then we expanded it to Washington, D.C. to be led by the same folks that run our D.C. bureau, and really put a lot of focus and effort into building and aggregating all of our content, but then also restructuring it and producing new originals as well as just news in general. But we consider it this national flair, but with a local feel. We never want to lose sight that we're in these local markets. And that was, it was hard in the beginning to try and figure that out. And I think we found our way now, and we're excited about where it's going to go.
There's a higher level of polish now. Remind me, when it was in Nebraska, was it anchored?
Yes, it was, but not like it is today. Today we have
formally anchored.
Yes, I think today we have an amazing talent. These folks can. It's funny. It's not just digital, right? We think of this linear product being different than our digital, and I think those lines have really blurred. And I believe our anchors today could be on any screen, on any platform. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a digital stream.
And you have a new set, new studio. Then the studio is specific for this program, right?
We do, and we thought that was very important because it has to look good. It has to be quality on all platforms, all devices, and our users deserve that, right? They want that, they expect that. So if we're live with a local feed and then we go to this national feed, it needs to look just as good as it did when they were watching a local stream.
Why have you made this effort such a central, maybe not the absolute focus, but so central to your streaming strategy?
Two reasons. The first I mentioned already, which is we want to be live. We found the research showed, and then our traffic really showed the engagement was so high. We really didn't want to go dark. That was first and foremost. Secondly is we found that the need for local news coverage. It's amazing if you're in one town, one market, local news across the country can still be local for you, right? It's not only where you are, it's where you've been, it's where you're going, something that I'm firmly believe in, and we found that the stats really showed that viewership and engagement continued to increase even when they left the local feed. This national feed was getting the exact same amount of traffic, and in fact, people were tuning in at those moments, and those are things we didn't expect.
It's a tough needle to thread to make people in other markets care about, what you have to, your narrative, that's where your anchor comes in, is sort of playing a key role to contextualize what's the importance of this, why are we seeing this, basically, in front of us. I want to talk about iteration, because the whole point of this panel is that none of you have had a static news content strategy on your streaming platform. Now, Greg, you think there are some unique hyper-local opportunities for content and streaming, relatively low production things you can do like hyper-local sports or live streaming events. So what kind of opportunities do you see there, and what's the case to be made for taking that as a part of your strategy?
Yeah, we work with dozens of publishers, so we've seen a lot of experimentation in terms of trying different things. Some of them don't work, they fail. Some of them do work. And I'll highlight three that we've seen that have been successful. So one's a very simple one is, and again, drawing on what these guys have said about kind of creating habit, is monument traffic and weather cams. Putting a persistent cam up there, making your destination a tune-in every day to come back and see that, or for audiences that are potentially coming to go see that. So those create that habit at a very low cost. The second thing we've seen very successful is, again, hyper-local sports, working with the junior colleges, the local second-tier pro leagues, and even the high schools in terms of either producing those in some cases or working with those institutions to get the feed, putting it in your environment and presenting it back out. And then the most successful thing we've seen on that front is working with the state associations on the state championships, where it's a concentrated tournament over a period of days covering those events. We've seen that successfully in hockey and football, where it's driven huge amounts of traffic, their sponsorship opportunities.
And Greg, are we talking live there, or?
Yeah, we're talking live, and it's to Jeff's point, like huge tune-in times. People tuning in all day long to watch it, and drawing audiences outside the local community for I was amazed at the data we saw in the hockey tournament, in terms of drawing people all over the country. And then lastly, we've seen, to complement kind of the broadcast, is a real host-driven, what I call vlogging style engagement, lower production value, drawing on kind of the style of TikTok and YouTube of really having a dialogue and talking to the audience about local issues, engaging with those audiences. So we saw when a station added that component to their rebroadcast, they saw a lift in engagement and a reoccurring tune-in. And I think also drawing in a complementary audience to their broadcast, bringing in, as opposed to kind of Gen X and Boomers on the broadcast, bringing in Millennials and Gen Z to that audience mix and drawing on the next generation to engage with the station brand.
So it's kind of talking a video podcast essentially there, or?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen two things. We've seen it station-driven, where they're set up, and it's a host talking to the audience, or we've also had our customers experiment with out in the field, iPhone-based, talking about a kind of a local event. And so again, really low production cost, but experimental. These guys do more polished stuff and more high value. But I think we've seen a lot of that experimentation with our customers, and the data kind of backs up the engagement from it.
Well, as the host of a weekly video podcast, which is very low production costs and highly experimental, I can only say
Yes.
all good things about Talking TV every Friday.
Nice plug, Mike.
Rick, you have found that you just can't keep rolling over a time-shifted newscast until there's another one to take its place, that will not do the job. So why not? And what essentially should a streaming channel look like instead?
I think this whole panel has been great so far, and these gentlemen have already made the case to the sort of the point behind the question. It's no longer a world of sort of traditional or digital. I mean, I think we can all agree, and if you can't agree, we could probably talk about it afterwards, that it's no longer, I mean, the audience is everywhere. The numbers are equal in terms of engagement and possibilities on sort of new platforms and traditional platforms. I mean, that's not earth-shattering information, but I do think there are a number of organizations that still think about it separately, and it's just a yes-and strategy for everybody now, in my opinion, going forward. And as a result of that, and I think these guys are talking about it, you have to intentionally program all platforms for the platform, right? And I think you just used the word polished. Polished could mean, well, it's an anchored experience and it kind of looks like television. I would argue that polished is intentionally programmed based on the rights requirements that you have with your pay TV providers versus what you can do on your own platform. We're working with one of the network-owned broadcast groups, and they're taking they have their main channel over the air programmed in the traditional way. They're taking that investment and intentionally programming 3 versions of that channel with a varying mix of live, pre-recorded, some pre-recorded programs specifically for those platforms, and they have unique experiences, whether it's on a virtual MVPD, whether it's over the air, whether it's on FAST, right? And FAST specifically to the point of, like, it's all the same now, and that's how that's how content creators, I don't want to imply I'm a content creator, but content providers, networks, channels should think about it. FAST, the numbers for FAST for news content are off the charts, right? The numbers show that like half of the channels out there on FAST are news, and half of the viewing time on FAST is news, right? That's massive. Think about that. I mean, sports is a little bit further down the list, but a good chunk, half of the content that's watched on all of the FAST channels out there are FAST. And I would argue the more real-time, the more live the content on those channels, the more the demographics you want will find them, whether they're male, whether they're younger. Somebody earlier today told me that what they're finding on the digital or on the FAST world is that the audience is younger and skewing more male than they might have imagined. That's a really interesting, positive dynamic, I think, for the industry.
We need less gun smoke and more news on
Less
FAST.
gun smoke.
We're going to come back to
Gunsmoke
FAST.
does very well, though.
I know. Just saying. I want to come back to FAST in a little bit. I want to talk first, Sahand, a little bit more about the mornings that you brought up. So you have high-performing morning time blocks. You have created streaming original newscasts in your markets, and you've given them latitude in each of those markets to create. So what is true in market X may not be the case in market Y. Tell us a little bit, maybe by some examples, what you're doing in those morning shows.
That's exactly right. And first, I'll just say Gunsmoke does incredibly well on Pluto TV. So for us, FAST is really an extension of the broadcast, right? And to everybody's point, you can customize that experience on different platforms, but essentially it's one stream for many people, just like broadcast. It is not an on-demand viewing experience. So we're very intentional about where we invest in the mornings and how long we invest for. And to the point earlier, we look at the minute-by-minute data. So we don't just look at the 7 a.m. block versus the 8 a.m. block. We're looking at 7:42 versus 7:45 and the ad breaks. And so what we've found is that certain markets have different drop-off times where audiences start to leave. And part of the big reasons for that is commuter times. So depending on the market, if it's a high commuter market, we see people drop off later or earlier, depending on that market. And so as a result of that, we try to invest an hour at a time. So in almost all of our markets, we are live from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. In some of our markets, we're now expanding the 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. And in some of our markets, we're even live all the way until 11:30. So we look at it in different 30-minute chunks, hour chunks. And if the ROI is there, meaning is the audience demand still there, then we'll continue to invest to extend that morning audience. And one thing we did very recently is to start putting our streams on Odyssey. So we recognize that the demand is still there, but now people are in their car. And so we're allowing people to stream our newscasts through the Odyssey platform.
And what about the substance of the shows themselves? Is it markedly different from what we'd see in a conventional morning show? Do you find that some segments kind of perform better there, so you lean into those a little further?
So the 7 a.m. is very similar to the 6 a.m., which is on broadcast. And we are very intentional about driving that linear audience and that reach back to stream. And so the format of the 7 a.m. and sometimes the 7:30 is very similar to the 6. The 8 a.m. is more exploratory, right? So you don't need as much traffic and weather. You need a little bit more of what's the news I need to know to get out the door. And so we're very intentional about the 8 a.m. and the 9 a.m. and experimenting on the format in each market.
And given the ultra granularity of the data that you have, and that you're looking at presumably daily, I guess, as you know, on air they can't scrutinize in quite the same way, and so you can make these absolutely minute little adjustments, I would think, to the nature of the show itself. How often do you do that? Are you iterating like little bits and bobs each week, or is it more sweeping than that?
So we look at it every 2 weeks. So we look at the data every day, and if anything stands out, we'll make note of it. But we like to let things run for at least 2 to 3 weeks to determine whether it's habitual or just a one-off.
So habits form in a couple of weeks.
Well, they say habits form in 3 weeks. So we
Do they say that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
So
good to
we
know.
tend to let it run for 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay. Jeff, with Live Now, I know it was initially just a matter of getting it off the ground. It was a hard thing to do because you're DJing. I've interviewed one of the people who anchors that, and it's like you're doing 10 things at once. And you have to find people who can handle the demands of producing a continuous newscast from the anchor desk. So assuming you found enough people with the right stamina to do this, which I don't know is that a safe assumption or not, how are you now evolving what viewers are actually seeing on screen? How are you iterating and making tweaks to what that looks like?
Yeah, first to your point, I think stamina is a great word. Passion is the other one. The ones who succeed here are with what we're doing. And for those who don't know, we literally put what we call them digital journalists, the DJs, and they control the whole view. It's one person. They're supported by producers, but they choose the shots. They talk to the content as it's happening, just constantly just managing everything. And so they have to have that passion. They have to have that stamina. But they also feel really empowered when we put them there. Like real great journalists want to be able to control the experience more and more. And the ones that really succeed here feel like, well, I get to now tell the story and watch with our viewers on this. And so it's really been exciting when you find those people to let them thrive and take our newscast to not even newscast, just the viewing experience to a whole different level. And how we've iterated. I mean, Live Now core value is almost evolution and iteration. It's constantly changing. I mean, when we started, it was just whatever, to your point, whatever press conference we could find and just put it on the air to fill the time. Now we have so much content coming in. It's a matter of, well, how do we decide what to show? Do we show one thing, 2 things, 5 things on the screen? How do we then make sure that the DJ knows what they need to do and what's working? And you've referenced like the minute-by-minute data and being able to review it. And we don't just review it, we actually show it at the same time. And you said on air can't see it. Well, with Live Now, they can. We've actually put a little viewing. You can look in the left-hand corner of Live Now, has an eyeball and how many people are watching at that minute. And the DJ, we did it to show viewers that there's other people are watching with them and to create this sense of community. Also gives the DJ an immediate feedback of, hey, are they interested in what I'm doing right now? And if they're not, maybe I need to pivot and decide some different content. And if they are, maybe I need to just keep going with that. We had, I think it was a week or so ago, we had the sentencing of the I'm playing on the Oxford shooting guy. And at the same time, the UN Council was voting on ceasefire recommendations with Gaza. And there was a question of, well, which one do we go with? And we definitely used data to decide, well, should we go with this one or have both on the screen? And it led to a really good, interesting, and valuable viewing experience.
And a lot of this is so you're drawing the material, the raw material is coming a lot from the O&Os, right?
Yes.
And so you'll show sometimes the same package is linear, sometimes is it different, very
Yeah, I mean, We might start with some of the linear like content because they're there for that reason, but there's a freeing power. We don't follow a standard broadcast format. There's no, this is 15 minutes, this is an hour, you have to have a 2-minute package. If there's reason to talk for 10 minutes, there's the freedom to do that, to really tell the story properly.
So they'll get the journalist on.
They'll get the journalist on, and then the journalists really are eager because now they get to talk about the things they didn't cover in their 1-minute package.
I get that the journalists are amped up about that. I don't know that the viewers always are too. I mean, sometimes there's a reason why a story might be, a minute and a half as opposed to 10. So does that little eyeball help?
I mean,
We're
absolutely
losing you.
helps. We're watching the data constantly. I mean, that's one thing you can't do in the same way on the linear side. We absolutely pay attention to the viewer, and we wouldn't do what we were doing if we didn't see that it was growing in different ways and growing overall and being successful. We pay attention to that, and we also just get feedback. We listen when they share back. I mean, it's basics of just how you interact with your community. But when people send emails, when they send comments, when they're coming in, we listen to it and we react and then we watch that eye as well.
So now that you have the streaming channels from the local stations and this, I mean, this thing was so you could do it, and you've proved out that you can do this. But it's also just because you can do it, should you do it?
Well, it goes back to what we were just saying. Ultimately, I don't really care whether anybody in this room likes how we look. We talk about polish. We talk about how we're doing the content. I care about whether a viewer watches what we're doing. And if that eye is going up, more people are watching, more people are engaging. If the data that we watch is going up, more people are doing it. And so we're doing the right thing. And that's what's going to drive our decisions.
Mike, Gray is continuously pulling content that's local someplace and then it's presenting it to viewers who are elsewhere. And it's all under this umbrella of local news live. And you can see how that would potentially confuse somebody saying local, and it's like they're in Omaha and they're wondering why there's a story about Maine that's on the channel. So, I guess it's easy to understand why you do that from an ROI perspective. You get more traction on your local stories, but how does that translate into something that national viewers want to engage with, want to habituate as part of their viewing?
Sure, I think it's really not confusing if you're telling the story in a way where you're communicating with the audience. You're not talking to them, you're talking with them. Technology now allows us with overlays, lower thirds, ticker systems, for really the viewer, regardless of where they're located, to understand what they're watching and why they're watching it. And that's where our hosts and our anchors really come into play, and they're able to talk to the audience and explain to them what they're seeing, why they're seeing it, and explain where this is all happening, both graphically and then also verbally.
Okay. I want to talk a bit more about original or bespoke content for the streaming platforms. We've talked about the morning programs that you do at CBS. For Mike and Jeff, I realize it's a little hard to pin it. You can't take local news live or what you're doing at Fox and it's all original in one sense. But on your O&O channels in the Fox case, and generally with Gray and CBS, what rough percentage are we seeing of original, bespoke for streaming content right now on those channels?
Yeah, for us, I'd say, excuse me, on the Fox local side, probably 80-20 right now, 80 original, 20%. And I think we're going to just keep growing the original side. I mean, there's a lot of content that we're experimenting with. One of the things I like is the fact that in the streaming space, we can't have the syndication or the prime or the sports. So there's these holes that we have to fill. And so we are now testing, okay, instead of just running the reruns of news, what could go in there? And because we have the data on a daily basis, you can decide, does that game show work? Are people coming to a local news app and want to watch local adjacent content? Do they want to watch more cooking shows or things that we test? Do they want to watch something more like a local live now, or if we can play with formats as well? And so we've been really getting into that right now, and trying to just drive that to be, honestly, I'd like to have it where it's all original.
Do you all like it as a lab space to develop things and test things for audiences, or is it kind of dangerous to be too experimental now at this
For
point?
us right now, it has to be. I mean, we're not going to find out unless we actually test it in that space. I mean, Fox TV has always been really big into testing local programming, and this is just another place where we can do that.
Okay. I want to ask about the VOD menu that you have on your AVOD channels. I get in the early stages of streaming news, I mean, people tell me all the time that nobody uses those. They're just dead space. Everyone's only watching live. There's almost no use for having them. Is that still the case? Are people, does the VOD menu get any traction at all? Anybody?
I can take that first. the vast, vast majority of viewing is still live, and those first 2 live rows for us at CBS. We have incredible on-demand content on our CBS News app, 60 minutes, 48 hours, and despite having incredible content that's long form, people still gravitate toward live channels.
Yeah, I'll complement that. We had a customer recently launch where they had VOD only, they didn't have live. They launched with us live in VOD and saw a 400% increase in average session time. And so I think there's an aspect of not the hunting and pecking of kind of finding a piece of content, is going in, trusting your local news source, going in and creating more of a lean back experience, or experience where you can be watching, and doing something else at the same time. And so certainly, the data we've seen is the majority of live or the linear channel versus the VOD.
We see the same thing, although if I'm being honest, I don't know that on the local side, we've really provided a VOD experience that is thinking about streaming users completely.
In the UX sense?
In
of
the
that?
UX, in the content, everything. I mean, we know what they like on the entertainment side within VOD. We know that they like live news, and maybe they will lean towards live, but I think a lot of the VOD majority is clip side, which doesn't really work in this space. And then those who are testing with long form, I don't know that we have enough that's really been unique thinking about how a streamer might consume it versus a traditional linear. So I'm not sure we really know the answer yet.
Yeah, because on entertainment, people are mad for VOD. That's why they're there. It's all, time-shifted programming. That was the whole empowerment of the viewer. So it seemed, all these years on that the VOD menu in news sites seems to be, might we say that it could go away? Is it burdensome even to have? Is there a future even on where you have the option of a VOD? We might just say, nah, it's not worth it.
I can say, and Gray, obviously I agree with these gentlemen that live is key, but there's also a place for VOD. We see some of our original content that maybe started live at one point, and other cases were just built directly for VOD that works really well. We have a segment that we call Investigate TV, where I think that'll be talked about later on today, that we're really excited about. Viewership really shows this is engaging. It's something our audience wants. When we place it on VOD, it does very, very well. And we also found that sometimes in our live segments, we can push the audience to VOD that's maybe regarding that topic or surrounding that area. So the two could live definitely hand in hand.
It's the genre is real time. The expectation is there from the consumer, I think, right? And I don't think live only means like live. Obviously, live means freshly
Live.
Live. Right. With a lot of talk. There was a talk in a panel earlier about no longer in certain markets going live with a live shot just for the sake of going live, right? Like that doesn't always forward or further the story. But in this genre, with this type of programming, the viewer needs to expect that the information they saw 3 hours ago has been updated in some form, right? It doesn't necessarily mean a live camera all the time at every moment, though that's great, right? We're lucky enough to kind of see the full spectrum at LTN, where we kind of start with the acquisition of sources all the way from the beginning. We work with the Fox stations and the Fox O&Os to kind of bring all those sources in that we were talking about. We do a lot of live sports production from the sort of biggest leagues down to the local, regional, high school folks, and bringing all of those pieces into some sort of an experience matters, because people want to tune in and see that this is happening now or happening in real time, and or it's been updated. And there's a whole conversation I want to have about the tooling required to do it, but I'll bite my tongue on that right now.
I want to ask you about breaking news for streaming. It's an audience driver, obviously proven audience driver. It's a specialty of yours. What do broadcasters need to have in place to deliver adequately on that?
Yeah, so, it's an interesting moment in time, right? I've been doing this news technology thing for many years, and it used to be sort of about bringing the best technology into the production control room so the technical people can get stuff on air more efficiently. That's not today's model anymore, right? It's the editorial folks oftentimes that are driving the experience. So we're working with another own broadcast group where they're actually having editorial folks, producers, program live segments with their hands on the tools that were previously reserved for the TD and director in the production control room. And they need, to your question, they need the ability to quickly access live sources, whether it's, an anchor desk in the newsroom or something that's coming from the network, and they need sort of, to simplify it, one button control to go live on this platform or live on all platforms, sort of what used to be called sort of a gang roll situation, right? Like they need to be able to do that here, there, or everywhere, but really easily, and all of the tooling that needs to be created for folks that aren't always sort of the technical first users. It's putting good hands in journalists' hands or producers' hands that aren't just sort of writing scripts. They're producing a technical experience. And it's all about getting live or real time or breaking or something that changes quickly to air.
I want to come back to FAST now. I just want to remind the audience, if you have a question, just come up to the mic. I've got a couple of questions about FAST, and then I'll take an audience question. Greg, obviously, FAST is hugely popular, rising enormously in popularity. Lots of possibilities offered by FAST channels. It's a very fast-shifting terrain, and the big VMVPDs, a phrase which will never roll off the tongue, are starting to cull and shuffle their lineups. So in view of that, how should broadcasters be thinking about their own opportunities and their kind of cautions that they should be aware of?
All right, I'm going to circle back to one point on live to VOD, and then I'll answer that question. So one angle to think about on the live to VOD is the economic angle. With pre-roll, you see about a 40% drop-off. In the live or the linear channel, you see about a 97% view through the ad experience. So the programmatic buyer, when they're signaling to buy, they're using that view through and the fulfillment of that ad as an economic signal. So it's actually a better economic impact for the publisher, the linear versus the VOD. So just food for thought. So in terms of the FAST, very complicated landscape, and evolving landscape rapidly. So the way that we've been communicating to our publishers is really thinking about it in 4 different tiers. So tier 1 is really, and the lowest hanging fruit, the best opportunity for partnership are the news aggregation services. News On, Haystack, Local Now. If you don't have the context there, come see me, I'll make the introductions. And they're working with other partners to drive distribution of their aggregate service. Haystack recently partnered with Google TV to distribute their aggregate of channels on Google, and we had to retool some of our technology to support that further distribution. Second is the virtual MPDs, the bigger ones, the paids. I think there's less opportunity there. There's the digital only or digital first aggregators, led by Tubi and Pluto, that are out there. And then finally, the hardware-driven partners like Roku, Samsung, and Vizio. And so there's, a lot of them have had different strategies in terms of how they approach it. And I think that strategy is evolving over time. So today, a lot of them have static EPGs where there's a static number. And so they're focused on their national channels, their sports, their entertainment, their movies. And so when they get kind of the top 20 or 10 DMAs covered, they call it a day. But as they move to dynamic EPGs, the ability to foster more local channels and facilitate the distribution when someone comes in from Dallas or Lafayette to feature that local news channel much higher on the EPG, or the development of news aggregation services. You say Xumo, part of Comcast, has Xumo Play, which is their national aggregation service. They've launched Xumo News, and so the team there is really taking a more local approach in terms of really expanding down the DMA list, the number of stations they're working with. So they certainly are, you see and you hear in the news, Roku and Samsung culling, but they're culling their 5th or 6th sports channel or their 7th or 8th local, trading those out for higher quality programming, or people that are doing better, higher brands willing to invest in those channels. But I think as we head into the 2024 election cycle, the 2024 Olympic cycle, we've certainly seen the volume of channels that we're putting out for testing and integration, and the dialogue that's happening with our customers is expanding. So it's not going to be, Rome wasn't built in a day, but certainly I think the tide that we're seeing in local and the opportunity over the next 18 months, I think is really going to be compelling.
I'm curious to hear from our three broadcasters on this panel how important you see fast channels on the VMVPDs, how important they are strategically in terms of audience acquisition, even digital revenue. Are they significant?
When you say DMVPDs, are we talking Sling TV and those?
Yeah.
Are we talking?
I realize the semantics here is very loose.
So when we think about DMVPDs, right now we don't have any of our local streams on there because of right now our local streams simulcast our news, and so we don't put our local streams on DMVPDs. We have our national stream on one or two different DMVPDs, but we think for fast channels, it's all about FVOD. Sorry, not FVOD, but the fast platforms like Pluto TV, Samsung TV Plus, and Roku.
Yeah, for Gray, right now in the fast space, we're very similar. We're on Samsung TV Plus, Roku Live, Vizio, and we're really just new in that game, right, in that space, and it's ever evolving. So I think it was one of those moments where we knew we needed to be in that space, and we're evaluating and seeing. I mean, we're just a year into those platforms, so I think we're all trying to figure out that business model that makes the most sense. But the most important thing for us was we wanted our audience to be able to find us on those platforms that they're using, and then we'll figure out how that works economically, but we knew we needed to be in the space.
Are those periods of evaluation shortening any?
I don't think so. I think for us, there's that window. You have to be live on a platform for enough time for the audience to find you, and two, for you to make sure you have the right programming and content that the audience wants. We're finding that in some cases, some platforms work great with live local news, and others platforms are working better when it's more original content. So I think we need to find our way before we are too fast to judge.
Sure. Jeff?
Yeah, I think stepping back, not just the can't even say it today, or the traditional fast. I think we look at it as people are changing their habits right now, and they're going to gravitate to whatever is the easiest thing for them, and that's not something that we can always control. And if it's easiest for them to bump into it on Samsung TV Plus, or on Roku channel because they're a Roku user, or on Sling because they're a Sling user, then we need to be there, and we need to be having our content there and seeing how this works. And that's been our philosophy so far, is just get, especially with Live Now from Fox, get everywhere where a viewer might be, because we want to be as easy as possible to find and consume.
And it can't look different, right? I think that, as Jeff was saying, it can't be fast is only Gunsmoke reruns, or just old newscasts, or stuff that was produced a year and a half ago and you had it in the can. It has to be an experience that if somebody was watching over the air, they would say, oh, this is the same content provider, this is the same high quality programming, this is new, or at least, updated in the last hour, or what have you. I think that's really key. We had the same conversation yesterday with SVG, right? There are sports channels out there that don't have any live sports on them, and while, you get an initial amount of sort of fast viewership, they're not exploding like they can if you start putting some level of live sports. It doesn't have to be the NBA Finals, but it could be high school sports, it could be just some university sports, it could be certain other pro sports. I mean, there's lots of live stuff out there, and you have to program the platform the way we've always thought about programming the traditional platforms. I think that's key.
And I think just to build on what Jeff said, internally we call that stacking distribution. Is the audiences in terms of where they engage, because of the different hardware, software, and the evolving space of what those companies are doing, have really fractured, over the last particularly 5 years, and it's only going to fracture more as people are trying to compete. And so what we're really trying to do is build all the technical rails to make that stacking distribution, easy and seamless, for our partners. The other point I'll raise, just in terms of economics, is we think about the local news driven by the local advertisers, the car dealers. With the mobile devices really pulling back on the first-party data, it's really changed the programmatic ad landscape. And what's started to fill that void is the Vizios and the Samsungs that have that first-party data are going back to Madison Avenue and selling those high view-through ads to those national advertisers, providing complementary monetization. You know, we were at the Vizio conference earlier, and they went from a $50 million ad business, Vizio Direct, in 2019 to a $2 billion business this year. And so that's money that's flowing through to the publishers. In aggregate, you know, FAST channels are generating about $7.3 billion in economic value this year, and that's projected to grow to $34 billion in 2027. And so I think we're seeing a rising tide of both consumer usage and a rising tide of monetization that's really complementary to local.
Now, we're up against our time, so I'm just going to ask one last question, and anybody can take it. Everyone doesn't have to, but I wonder if you see this period of time in news streaming as a sort of runway toward this not too distant future where it could supersede your linear audience. And are you looking at your programming strategy on streaming? Are you calibrating it with that possibility in mind?
I can start. I think it's an interesting question. I don't know if we ever really look at it that way as a replacement. I think it's more complementary. I don't know if we ever need to look at it as a way of this will end up being more so or replace linear. We're very fortunate, at least speaking for Gray, we're very strong linear. I mean, that's something we don't want to replace. We find a place for both of these streams to live hand in hand. And you get to a point where some of these devices and platforms, does a viewer really know, are they watching the linear feed or are they watching the digital feed? It becomes very blurred, I believe, when you're looking at a big screen, and then are you on a Roku device? Are you on Samsung TV Plus as an example? Are you on our core website, or are you actually watching over-the-air television? I think it becomes more about the local news and the content that we're presenting, not so much if it's linear or digital.
Anybody else?
It's not really a runway. I mean, I think the plane's in the air, right? I mean, viewers are everywhere, right? It is, you have to, it's not about replacing one or this is the big thing, this isn't. The plane is in the air. It's a yes and strategy. Everybody is consuming content in all different ways. That ship has sailed, maybe airplanes.
Let's keep it with planes, and there are many planes.
There are a lot of planes. I mean, the other thing, one last comment around this, which I think is we haven't touched on, maybe it's a different panel someday, that Greg was making was, how do you monetize all of these platforms? How do you get the appropriate ad signaling and ad triggering across the 25 different platforms we just threw out loosely in this conversation, and sort of getting that fine integration, or the right integration into the way the content is created and making it monetizable and ad supported, because we're talking mostly about free in this conversation. How do you make that happen? That's a huge challenge too, and we spend a lot of time sort of digging into that specific area, which isn't something most folks talk about, but it's messy and it's
We
ugly.
talk about it, and that is, as you're right, that is a panel on its own for a different day, which we will do. And that comes to the end of this panel. We are going to, first of all, please thank our wonderful panelists for their insights.